Drilling fluids touch just about everything in the drilling process. We're here to deconstruct the drilling process and drilling fluid concepts to provide a deeper understanding of our industry. In each episode, we'll share information, talk to interesting people, and maybe share a few stories along the way. Welcome to the Flowline, a production of AES Drilling Fluids, brought to you by Matt Offenbacher and Justin Gauthier.
Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Flowline. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but we are in the upgraded studio, and I say we, myself and my lovely co-host, Matt Offenbacher. Matt, how does it feel to be in our sort of newly upgraded studio?
I mean, it's pretty exciting. I know this is part of a process, right? But like so we got a really cool wall. We've got a really cool light that people following on YouTube can enjoy.
Yeah.
And then I think we're gonna do something with the table, but like it's
come together.
It's an evolution here. I think we probably need to do something with these boom arm things. I think.
Yeah.
But anyways, we're evolving, and we've been doing this for going on 6 years or something now. So
it's crazy to even think of that, but yeah, it's because it was like before COVID.
Yeah, I mean, it took us longer than Joe Rogan to get the full studio, but I see a path.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. It's cool to just kind of grow it and I mean, at the end of the day, it's the content is really what matters. But it's nice to be able to sort of grow the brand even within the podcast. And then too, it's we still have folks coming and just showing appreciation on us, educating them, and continuing to put out the information like we do. But anyway, so no, it's fun, exciting, and so for all the listeners that have been along for the journey, we'll keep evolving and doing what we do. But Matt, I heard something this morning that I thought was kind of funny, and maybe sad for some people at the same time. But it's going to be the last hoot at Hooters here in the next few days as they're filing for bankruptcy. And so I don't know, were you ever like a Hooters guy?
No, I can't say I was.
Yeah.
There was certainly sort of a I don't know if you call it like a moral stigma where my mom was like, never go to that place. And so like when I would have coworkers, I know people are like, look, I love the wings and they have TV, like, and so like when I was there occasionally, it was always like uncomfortable.
Right.
But I will never forget in cross country, we had this very amazing cross country coach, like huge, just an inspiring person, which I think is what you want in a high school coach, right? Like,
most definitely.
You want to be a better person, grow up to be a better man.
Yeah.
Like that's what he did. And oh yeah, you got faster at running at the same time. But the joke was, and I mean, take it back a little bit. Whenever you would go to get your trophy, like the team trophy or whatever, everybody wore jean shorts.
Okay.
And then Tyson Hendrickson, who was like, fastest guy in the state, he was on our team, he was a senior at the time, would always wear a Hooters shirt, which made my coach clearly disappointed and uncomfortable, but it was the one that said delightfully tacky yet unrefined.
Yes. That's their tagline.
That was the shirt he always wore to get his awards, and he got a lot of awards.
No way.
Didn't necessarily represent the high school perhaps as coach aspired us to in that moment, but anyways,
that's funny.
Yeah.
What a neat story. I'm glad that I brought that up now. This is getting good. So funny, besides the obvious area, they kind of hit the scene, and it was like the man cave outside the garage that people could go to and have fun, watch sports. They kind of like helped scale the chicken wing sport bar scene. But what I didn't know is they actually started an airline. Did you know about this? In 2003.
Yeah, I didn't know it was that late, but like there was some sort of a list of like failed business efforts or whatever, and it comes up, and it's one of those like it must have not lasted long.
No, it was 3 years, and then they leased 3 planes from Boeing, and then they created like a sports bar atmosphere within it, and their target was guys going on golf trips.
Really? I would assumed it was just been like all routes to Vegas.
Right. Yeah. It's I found that funny. And they actually created an energy drink, which failed as well. But talk about just like testing the waters and all kinds of different things, which is not necessarily inspiring me to have AES start a
Energy drink
an
or
energy drink
airline?
or an airline. But
Okay.
it's an interesting story. If with a business that you drive by and you're just like, oh, there's Hooters, and probably not going to go in. But fun fact, before we get into drilling fluids, folks, don't worry. Um, Charlie Freeman, who I'm sure you've all worked with if you've been around the business long enough, he's retired, and big shout out to Charlie Freeman. When I first came to the Houston office, that's where he took me and the boys for lunch, and that was his idea. So Charlie might be sad now that Hooters is going bankrupt. However, the original owners are looking to buy it back and then create a family-friendly atmosphere.
Interesting.
So,
Well, I mean, I do find it interesting, like, because I figured, okay, bankruptcy, does that, someone will buy the brand and it's going to end up as something else or whatever, but okay, well, time will tell.
now you know the rest of the story. Anyway, on to more important things, obviously. Leave it up to me to bring fun facts to the table. X-ray diffraction, Matt. It's something that a lot of people maybe in the field are familiar with, but haven't really necessarily dealt with here in our lab. And yourself, specifically has probably dealt with this a ton of times. But it's one of those where, the name gets thrown around sometimes when people want to do some additional, analysis or testing. And so I think breaking it down and giving folks a better understanding is, what it's used for, how it works, and what do you actually get from X-ray diffraction to kind of clear things up in case people are, just not clear exactly what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we throw XRD around a lot, and we get a lot of requests from customers like, hey, can you run XRD on this? And it is certainly an insightful tool, but what does it all mean? And a lot of times we try and find out more about why you're asking, because it could be something's better. A lot of times it's something you'll run anyways, but yeah, so I thought we'd dig in a little bit on that.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing we need to unpack is, what is crystallography?
So it's the structure of minerals. So what's great about the XRD is it can tell you a lot about, the rock you're drilling through. Steel and metal is actually a crystalline structure as well, but the way atoms are arranged gives them their properties, right? So the classic example we always use, you used in science class was carbon can be arranged into diamond. It can be arranged in graphite, right? Like very different properties, but it's the structure of the carbon atoms that drives that.
Gotcha.
So if we can understand the structure, we can get an idea of what it is. And so there's a whole study in how to do this.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that's crystallography.
No, that's a perfect segue into going into what are the uses of XRD, X-ray diffraction?
A lot of it is formation characterization. We run into a common thing or a common example I would use is we just tear up a bit, right? And everybody says, oh my gosh, what happened? We just cored this bit. And we get some samples and we say, look, actually you're in a bunch of pyrite, or, there's a bunch of chert in these cuttings we're getting back. And so, now right? There's other times where, hey, this stuff, is this really reactive clay, or, what are we drilling through here? So it can be helpful from a troubleshooting or sort of a like narrowing down what you may be dealing with kind of concern.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is just, are there contaminants so from a quality control perspective, barite, what else is in it? Those are things that we can sort of dig into just by running X-ray diffraction and getting an idea of, okay, what else is there that maybe isn't what its nameplate says.
Gotcha. No, it's quite simple when you think about it, what we can use it for. And so diving deeper, let's talk about how it works, specifically.
Yeah. So first things first, we need a sample, and this is going to be, it has to have this crystalline structure, right? So if you just give me a mud sample, I'm going to have to dry it. It's going to be whatever the solids are in there. It's not going to tell you anything about the liquids or organics for that matter. But let's say we catch our sample of cuttings using a procedure that we have, either from the shakers or maybe even, we had one issue recently where we made sure it came from the junk slot of the bit because we were having some hole problems. But okay, what were you actually drilling into at the time? So knowing where that sample came from can be insightful. Is it, gummed up clay on the stabilizer, or is it something that you saw at the shaker so you don't know the exact depth? But you take that sample, and a big part of this is I try and emphasize when folks are like, hey man, can you run this? Well, what does that mean? The prep takes a lot more time than the test is like 15 minutes. But getting it ready to be tested is what takes all the time, because what you do is first you have to wash all that organic material off. So you rinse it in, a xylene IPA solvent or some other kind of solvent. You're going to dry it in the oven, and you can't dry it too hot because like you want all these vapors to go away, but you don't want to, if you heat it up too much, you can actually alter the clay, which we're trying to find out what it is, right? And then you got to grind it into a really fine powder. And the whole idea is it's got to be ground into this really fine powder, because when I hit X-rays at it, I want those X-rays, kind of that X-ray beam, to be able to pick up every possible angle that these, imagine like a bedding plane of a rock. Well, on a very microscopic scale, I want those to be in every possible angle so that I detect everything that's there. And if the particles are too big, it may hit at like a weird angle and give you an inaccurate reading. So you got to grind it into really, really fine powder, which is another thing in analytical conversation. You say, is it destructive or non-destructive testing? So destructive, I have to destroy the sample. It cannot be used for anything else. This is non-destructive. However, I ground it down to a really fine powder. So its properties for a lot of our testing is not the same. Thankfully, I only need a very small amount to do this test. But you grind it, you put it into the sample holder, and then you're going to put it in the machine, click run. And that machine actually has a beam that emits X-rays. It has a tray. Ours has like a little platter, so you can click run and it'll do like 6 at a time. And then it has a detector of how those X-rays are deflected. But the whole thing is on it's the device called a goniometer. Fun vocabulary.
Sounds like something out of The Hobbit.
Sure. The idea being, though, that you're tilting it at this precise angle, so the X-rays get swept across the sample, right? And you know that exact angle at which it struck as you detect the diffracted X-rays. And, in essence, an X-ray, depending on the spacing between those atoms, is going to diffract it in different ways relative to that angle hitting it. And so that scatter plot, sort of, you go back to a library and you say, okay, how do these angles match a known material? And when you get those overlays, you say, okay, then this is quartz, right? And normally you'll get like a categorical breakdown of minerals, so it'll be like silicates, carbonates, iron sulfide oxide, salts, sulfates. So I will emphasize that barium sulfate, or barite, no matter where this material came from, if it came from inside of a tool, this is classic gotcha, is, oh, well, it's mostly barite, therefore it was barite that caused the tool to fail. No, barite's on everything, right? Like if you have a weighted mud, it is very difficult to not have barite on everything, which means it is not likely the cause of your problem. It's just there when it happened, which is sort of inevitable.
Interesting. That's actually, that right there is a highlight of something that I think, even thinking through that, it's like, like I never really thought of it like that. And so that's a really good point. I'm glad you kind of highlighted that. That's an interesting, I don't know, little nugget there. Anyway,
yeah. Well, I mean, to add to that, all this stuff's going to be reported as percent by weight.
Yeah.
Well, if it's reported by percent by weight, guess what? Barium sulfate's heavy, right? Like that's the reason we use it as weight material. So it's going to show up in mineral abundance much higher than other things. But that doesn't necessarily, you need to look at those other constituents, because there may be more of a smoking gun there than anything as far as that abundance. But, keep that in mind. And then there's another thing you can do, and we don't always do this, but there will be a abundance of clays, and you can say, well, what clays? This is a separate step called running a clay slide. And there's a whole chart you can go by. But basically, we can measure very, very, angstroms of spacing. And so if you look at when clay layers collapse in sort of a flow chart, you can see what it is, right? So first thing you'll do is actually treat it with glycol. Glycolate the clay. So you've already run your first run of XRD. Now you treat it with glycol and run it again. And guess what? The spacing between certain clay layers may open up more, and you'll see that distance increase. Then you'll take that sample and you'll heat it to 400 degrees Celsius. Pretty hot. Some layers will collapse. But then you take the sample and heat it up to 550 C, and other layers will collapse. And based upon what expands and what collapses at what temperature, you should be able to interpret, based on a pretty elaborate flow chart, whether that is an illite or a kaolinite, a chlorite. And so being able to draw those distinctions is really what will tell you more specifics on the clay. But if you think about all these extra steps, this adds days to your results just because you've got to expose them to heat and get them processed and that sort of thing. And then you've got to take all this data and interpret it, because there's still going to be a bunch of noise. It turns out that if you shoot x-rays everywhere, it is possible that there will be some fuzzy things that a skilled, trained person can look at and say, that is noise. That is not some random material that's here.
Is there something common that you look for? Like, is it like, oh, in most things you have to kind of eliminate this product or material?
That's actually a better question for our folks that do this all the time.
Sure. Okay.
It's just interesting to see, because, my question first was, how do I know this isn't subjective? How do I know that if I give it to one chemist versus another, I don't get two slightly different but close answers? And what we found is, no, it's pretty consistent. And I think it gets easier when you're looking at formation material all the time versus you can do crystallography for a lot of other things, and it would be harder to see noise if you didn't look at it all the time. But another thing you may do in the midst of all this is you may actually just do a CEC, or a cation exchange capacity, of this material to like reference. Say, oh, I see smectite, and I say, oh, it's also got a very high CEC. That makes sense. So you can sort of cross-reference what I'm seeing makes sense with a separate measurement. But when I've gone down that whole path, you'll get basically a table that just says, here's the mineral abundance of these different things, and we can look and see what's kind of interesting relative to what happened. So putting it in context is an important part of the lab report without making too many assumptions. But, if it's a tool failure and there's a bunch of like metal in there, that kind of makes sense. If we drilled through something really reactive, it's like, yes, it's very reactive. Here's what it looks like. Sometimes you can even correlate that and say, look, this calcite, there's a lot of calcite in this. That correlates to a formation we know we drill through at 8,000 feet. So that's likely where this is coming from. So, it takes a little time to prepare and analyze these tests. Doing the test itself isn't as big of a deal, but having good data out of that test is what all the upfront prep takes. And then, you may do something more, right? Like, so we have XRF, X-ray fluorescence. And what that is that does elemental analysis. So let's say I'm looking for something in particular. If I already know that certain atoms are present, it really narrows down what I have to look for in X-ray diffraction, because a bunch of stuff it could be, it definitely isn't. So they sort of go hand in hand sometimes. And then even, we're looking for minerals. And so, I might pick up, there's some magnetite in there, which normally we don't drill through a lot of magnetite. But then I run XRF and I have a much tighter, higher detection threshold, and I start picking up molybdenum and vanadium. And you're like, okay, that's pretty high, higher grade steel. That's not just random stuff I might have either drilled into or picked up somewhere. So, once again, like, we like to use these tools and get them to work together.
Right. So with XRD, would you say it's used primarily to help sort of do sort of operational support, or do you also use it to sort of qualify different materials when you get them in? I mean, do you use it on the R&D side as well, or just on the sort of support side?
We do on the R&D side to some degree. It's just, it really depends. The other thing is, I mean, without trying to make this episode too complicated, we got a scanning electron microscope, and it does EDS, which is another way to do elemental analysis, especially with like lighter weights. And so we start using the scanning electron microscope a lot more, where we would have run XRF or even XRD. So it really depends. I mean, sometimes impurities and everything, you can better characterize them.
Yeah.
Generally, if we don't know, we'll probably run it just to see.
Sure.
It's sometimes helpful, sometimes not, but you may be surprised, and we have the things, we may as well do it on the R&D side of, to satisfy our curiosity.
Gotcha. Well, that kind of wraps it up, Matt. I don't have any other questions. Anything else that you can think of before we sort of let everyone go?
I mean, I think the only thing to wrap is this is a great tool. It's a commonly used one. We get asked about it a lot, I think, without people entirely knowing what they're asking for. And so that's where we like the problem statement, where it's what is the issue that you're having, or what is the question that you have, or the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
And then we can recommend, maybe it's not just XRD, maybe it's a few other things. So I think XRD sort of has become a common, like, tick the box as part of my investigation. But if you want to go deep, we may, with a little more information, be able to give you a little more.
Gotcha. Well, with that being said, folks, if you have any other questions, or you want us to dive deeper, obviously we named some other tests and some different instruments and tools that we've got in our lab here. I'm sure we'll cover most of those, or if not all of them, in another episode. But if you have any questions or ideas for a show, again, that's the best sort of form of getting us, or helping us come up with different episodes. You can reach us on LinkedIn, or you can reach us at the Flowline podcast at aesfluids.com. Thanks for subscribing. If you're watching on YouTube, any suggestions, any thoughts around kind of the new look would be great. Check the website out. And until next time, folks, take care. Cheers.
Thanks for listening. Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of the Flowline. And remember, may your returns always be full and your trips always smooth. Views expressed in this program belong to participants and not their employees. The program is for informational purposes only and cannot take the place of seeking professional advice. Copyright AES Drilling Fluids.